The 80s, the decade of opportunity for young British game designers. The IT industry was flourishing. The ZX Spectrum and the Commodore 64 were the new hot home computers in the beginning of the decade, and everyone was making games on their bedrooms, mimicking what they saw at the arcades. Founded and established in Liverpool in 1982 by two former employees of Bugbyte Software, Mark Butler and Dave Lawson, Imagine was known as the place where dreams come true. Their young programmers were like rock stars, making tons of money overnight. But all began with their first game for the Spectrum 16K and Commodore VIC-20 that Dave Lawson had put together, Arcadia. Its space theme was usually popular in the beginning of the 1980s, mainly due to Hollywood's tendency on making futuristic movies that consequently spawned also a burst of related video games in the arcade and pinball markets. There was no computer-related retailing in the UK, so before Arcadia, it was all done by mail order. When the advert of Arcadia came out on magazines, envelopes with money started to arrive on the mail on a daily basis, and suddenly Mark and Dave realized that this was it. Their time has come. After that, around 83, the big UK retailers saw the potential of the video game industry and then started stocking up on games big time. People no longer had to buy them by mail order through magazines. The so-called micro shops were already thriving all over the place, and gamers just had to go to those shops and browse through all these new and flashy cases and find the right title to buy. So, when back to Arcadia's success, it made Imagine's founders hire more staff to start making more and more games. It also compelled and encouraged its programmers to work better and harder. Imagine's brand rapidly started to worth millions. There were, at the time, no other company that had ever produced so many great games in such a short period of time and always created strong impact through extremely clever advertising campaigns on the most popular magazines of the time. It was Imagine Software that gave birth to these awesome and outstanding pieces of advertising art. Before that, adverts were tiny, with an awful little drawing and 3 or 4 paragraphs of text explaining the game. Just dreadful. British people were familiar with the video game phenomenon that just recently exploded due to Clive Sinclair's very affordable machine, the ZX Spectrum. Many young kids were getting these machines for their birthdays, for their success at school, for Christmas, etc. And the Spectrum was really easy to program that all over the United Kingdom success stories were starting to emerge, just like Matthew Smith and its Manic Miner. But the craze wasn't so extensive like the one that was shown by these young executives at Imagine. They were driving Ferraris, BMWs, and even custom hand-built motorbikes. Alongside with all that luxury and Mark Butler's love for fast motorbikes, Imagine Racing Team was created, in which Mark himself was a rider. Imagine was seen by everyone as a place where dreams come true, and everybody wanted to work there. In the 60s, the Beatles placed Liverpool on the map, and 20 years later, it was the time for Imagine to do the same. Dave Lawson saw the potential in the video game industry and jumped right in at first. Money was pouring down, but it was wasted in the next morning. There was no financial control at all. So, by the end of '83, debts began to pile up, mainly on the advertising side, and later tape duplication unpaid bills also started to appear. For Christmas of '83, Imagine booked the entire cassette duplicating capacity of Kiltdale, one of the biggest duplicators for the software business, in an attempt to prevent other software houses having games ready for the Christmas rush. But they ended up with a huge stock of unsold games and a £60,000 debt. Even so, by 1984, and despite all the commercial success that their video games demonstrated, Imagine was ready for the next step. Show to the world, through the eyes of BBC Television, the concept and development of a brand new product that would be different from all other things being made by all other British software houses. Nonetheless, that new product required more memory, so a special add-on needed to be manufactured and bundled with the so-called Mega Games that would also prevent against piracy, drastically increasing its final price. Imagine intended to develop 6 of these Mega Games, and the first 2 were Cyclops and Bandersnatch. The artist Roger Dean was hired and had already designed the boxes and the ads, which were beginning to appear, but the company went bust in July of '84 due to its unpaid debts that were escalating as time went by, and Dean never saw the £6,000 that he reputedly asked for his work. Imagine lasted 18 months, but the truth is that both those guys, Mark and Dave, did make serious mistakes and left people really irritated and disappointed. But they were the ones that started the whole video game industry in the UK. That's a fact. The dream ended, but the people who lived it moved on. The rights to the Imagine label was bought by Ocean, and some of the programmers began working freelance on games for Ocean, who also partially backed a new Liverpool company called Denton Designs. Bandersnatch was the only Mega game in development by that time, ending up being finished 2 years later by Finchspeed, a company formed by the other programmers and Imagine co-founder David Lawson. The project was renamed to Bratakas, and now a 16-bit title that didn't require that special memory hardware add-on. So, from the ashes of the defunct Imagine software, Psygnosis was born, being Bratakas the very first video game under the Psygnosis label. As for Cyclops, never passed the paper sketch stage, so it was later also used as a sub-label of Psygnosis. David Lawson, founder of Imagine Software, and Ian Etherington, financial director, joined forces with Jonathan Ellis, and the trio founded Psygnosis. So, Psygnosis rose from the ashes of Imagine Software, and Cyclops was an obvious tribute to their roots. They've also kept their bond with record cover artist Roger Dean, who drawn both logos and was seen as the mind who revolutionized the music industry in the 70s and 80s with its amazing album covers for bands like Yes and Asia. For their logos, they were after something related with mind and knowledge, and also inspiration by the future of things to come. So Dean thought of an owl, a symbol of wisdom, and gave it this metallic futuristic look. Behold the mighty Psygnosis. Bratakas was the first title with the Psygnosis label, and was a game that was in development at Imagine Software when it all went down. It was originally being developed for the ZX Spectrum, and it would need a special memory add-on that would increase the production costs and consequently its final price. Now, as a 16-bit title, all that would change, but the crappy control system makes it almost unplayable. The only thing that really saves Bratacus is the awesome artwork by Roger Dean. Who else? From the beginning, Psygnosis' main focus was towards the most popular 16-bit machines in mid-80s, the Commodore Amiga and the Atari ST. Almost all other developers in town were still making games for the 8-bit systems that by then flooded the market mainly in the UK, so this was a huge advantage and the opportunity of a lifetime, cause many new Amiga and ST games coming out were just ports of 8-bit titles, inferior and really poor ones. So their future looked really bright, and after a couple of somewhat interesting titles, they've published Manus, a side-scrolling shooter from a brand new Scottish developer, DMA Design, the team behind Lemmings and known today as Rockstar North. So, David Jones was working on Coppercon 1, hugely inspired on Konami's arcade smash Salamander, and after being turned down by a handful of publishers, he approached Psygnosis, who promptly said yes, that they would publish it, but its name should be something more appealing than Coppercon 1. Manus was one of the first games released under the Cyclops logo, and the very first title from DMA Design that revealed quite successful. After Manus, other titles followed, but again, it was a DMA Design game that got all the attention in late 1989. This one was made using a gift from Psygnosis to David Jones after the success of Manus, a 25 MHz 386DX. Blood Money was another side-scrolling shooter inspired by yet another arcade hit by Irem, Mr. Ellie, and was highly praised by the press that stated that Blood Money was definitely one of the best games of its type on the Amiga to date. Also in 1989, Psygnosis gave to another developer the opportunity of a lifetime, Reflections, best known for the Shadow of the Beast franchise. But their first game was Ballistics, developed by Reflections co-founder Martin Edmondson, who took it to Psygnosis along with an early demo of the very first Shadow of the Beast. Needless to say that Psygnosis was extremely impressed by that demo and its amazing 12 levels of parallax scrolling never seen before. Ballistics, that was based on the Crossfire board game, sold well, and the 35-pound Shadow of the Beast was a huge success. You know why? Cause it included a Roger Dean t-shirt. Not one of his own shirts, okay? You know what I mean. This game was exactly what Amiga owners like myself wanted. A game that could show off all the machine's potential in every technical aspect, graphic and musically speaking. David Whittaker composed one of the most fondly remembered soundtracks from the 16-bit era. My friends that didn't own an Amiga would get really impressed by it and ran off to the next store to buy one. Kind of. Let's be honest, the game lacks content and depth. It was basically a really impressive tech demo, like the ones used to show off new TV displays on stores, you know? A year later, Shadow of the Beast 2 was released and it was an even bigger commercial success, grabbing scores of 80+ all over the press, except from the guys at Computer and Video Games magazine that gave it just 59%. Graphics and sounds were praised, but the most improved thing was its gameplay. The game appeared also bundled in the Screen Gems Amiga 500 pack that so many gamers got as a gift back in Christmas of 1990. But also in January of 1990, another video game developer got their chance in the hands of Psygnosis, Raising Hell Software. And the game that awakened Psygnosis' interest was The Killing Game Show. Martin Shutley, founder of Raising Hell Software and developer of the Killing Game show, sent his demo to Psygnosis, who grabbed immediately this run-and-gun shooter in where we control a robot shooting everything that moves trying to reach the exit on this maze of platforms. Awesome gameplay and superb music. The game received 92% in Amiga format. The game was later re-released for the Sega Mega Drive Genesis under the name Fatal Rewind. Later, Raising Hell Software was bought by Sega, who forced the developer to change its name, cause the word Hell was kind of inadequate. So Raising Hell Software became Bizarre Creations, developing later down the road awesome titles like Metropolis Street Racer, the Project Gotham Racing series, and Blur. 1991 was the year for DMA Design. Lemmings was born. It was a huge success for both DMA Design and Psygnosis. It even had in-game references to Shadow of the Beast in 2 of its levels. Again, Amiga format gave it 92%. So, after the 20,000 copies sold of Menace and the 40,000 of Blood Money, Lemmings went completely off the chart and sold for the Amiga, and in its first day only, 55,000. Worldwide and on all platforms for which Lemmings was ported, it is estimated that it sold more than 15 million copies. In 1992, the shadow was cast upon the Beast once more, and Shadow of the Beast 3 was released. The game was highly influenced by the feedback from players of the first 2 games and received scores around the 90% mark, but failed to sell as well. I consider Beast 3 the most enjoyable one on the gameplay area, so it was the end of the road for the series. And also in 1992, one of the best looking and sounding games was released, Agony. Once again, Psygnosis saw its potential in an early prototype that Frank Sauer and Yves Grolet from Art and Magic showed off the record at the European Computer Trade Show in London. Psygnosis gave them all the freedom to finish their game, and you're probably thinking that the owl that we control in the game was somewhat an imposition from Psygnosis. You can't be more wrong. That was part of the developing team's initial design, cause they were looking for something different from everything else already seen. Psygnosis even provided more help to finish the game, so they hired the best musicians to create one of the greatest soundtracks ever made for a 16-bit system. Tim Wright's amazing piano intro was even adapted without consent and consequent credit by the keyboard player of the Norwegian symphonic black metal band Dimmu Borgir in the song Sorgens Kammer from the 1996 album Stormblast. The band removed that song from a later re-release of that same album. Agony didn't have the commercial success it deserved, cause it was exclusive to the Amiga, and that machine was about to be overtaken by the 16-bit consoles and multimedia PCs that were just around the corner. However, it is often remembered as a piece of art. Back in the Amiga and Atari ST days, there were a lot other titles that I could mention, but these were the ones that gave fame to that owl who offered the chance to a handful of developers responsible for so many awesome of today's IPs that are among the best that we can nowadays play and enjoy. As said in the beginning, Psygnosis was a symbol of the future, of things to come, so the CD era was upon us. In 1991, the Psygnosis Advanced Technology Group went on to explore the possibilities of the infamous full motion video technology for their games, and their first attempt was with Microcosm, released in October of 1993 for the Japanese FM Town Smarty and Sega Mega CD, followed by the PCE 3DO and the Amiga CD32. Back then, this was quite exciting. I was witnessing a complete revolution in video gaming and completely mesmerized with what the CD format was capable of deliver. Microcosm was huge in production costs, and the uncompressed intro alone achieved an astonishing number of 6.5 gigabytes of hard disk space. That was something really mind-blowing in 1993, and even Rick Wakeman from the band Yes was hired to provide original music for it. Despite all the astronomical numbers, the game is really bland with really poor gameplay. But let's be honest, the future of computer games is here, just like Amiga Format stated when they gave it 87% on their review. Psygnosis was, once again, taking over the reins of the evolution of video games. And that was when Sony Electronic Publishing Company acquired Psygnosis, opening all the doors and windows to a whole new world of possibilities and giving to Psygnosis the right tools for developing exciting new titles using CD technology that would be Sony's media of choice for the bright future that was just a couple of years away, the rise of the PlayStation. As you know, Nintendo and Sony were working together for a future CD add-on to this next-gen system. But observing the breach of contract from Nintendo and the disavowal from Sega, Sony decided to create his own home console and advance into this uncharted territory of video game development by acquiring Psygnosis in May 22nd of 1993 to enhance Sony's in-house development capabilities, because they knew that the Liverpool-based software publisher was making progresses with their own CD technology research. The deal made total sense to Psygnosis, cause they weren't locked down making games exclusively for Sony. Despite 50% of Psygnosis being owned by Sony, they were free to develop and publish games for other platforms like the PC, Sega Saturn and Nintendo 64. So while developing software for Sony, Psygnosis would continue to market and distribute games under the Psygnosis brand, and would play a major role in Sony's expansion into Europe. Meanwhile, Cyclops was silently abandoned, being its latest releases Anarchy, a pretty decent and updated version of the classic arcade game Defender, and Matrix Marauders, Spellbound and Strix. These three with nothing really astonishing to point out besides the amazing covers. Between that period of time and prior to the PlayStation release, Psygnosis published many other awesome titles, from which I must highlight Hired Guns from DMA Design, that is an awesome Dungeon Master clone set in the future that can be played between 1 to 4 players on a single machine. A pretty fun and absorbing adventure game by the name of Innocent Until Caught. The obvious sequels to Lemmings, Lemmings 2 The Tribes and All New World of Lemmings. The Amiga version of The Second Samurai by the great Rafael Secco, and the sequel to First Samurai that I've already reviewed on my channel. Brian the Lion, an Amiga exclusive platform title that by 1994 was better than everything else in the genre across all systems available by then. And an exclusive 3D action-adventure game for MS-DOS that was really ahead of its time, Ecstatica. The deal with Sony allowed Psygnosis certain tools for creating a dedicated development system for the PlayStation, curiously based on PC hardware, simpler and cheaper. From those exclusive research and development initial years, Psygnosis came up with two amazing franchises: Destruction Derby and Wipeout. Destruction Derby, developed by Reflections Interactive and directed by Martin Edmondson, creator of Shadow of the Beast, recalls in an interview that showing their first PlayStation game to Ken Kutaragi, the man considered as the father of the PlayStation itself, was quite amusing. He flew from Japan with a team of engineers to test firsthand one of the most important launch titles for Europe. Kutaragi smiled a lot and was really enthusiastic, and his one and only comment was that it would be great that the debris from the cars stayed on the track. The hardware was already pushed to its maximum, so it was a daunting task just to think about doing it. Nonetheless, the game was a huge success and, along with Wipeout, helped to cement PlayStation supremacy. Just before Destruction Derby, by September of '95, Wipeout was released, the very first PlayStation game from Psygnosis that was conceived, as stated by Lee Karras in an interview, after a drunken conversation between Nick Burkham and Jim Bowers in a pub in Hoxton. This futuristic racer with an amazing techno soundtrack featuring music from, for example, the Chemical Brothers, and with strong influences from Power Drum and F-Zero, grabbed every single one of us. Video games were, after all, also for adults. On PlayStation's first European year, 40% of total sales of video games were from Psygnosis titles. Now, that was an incredible achievement. Consequently, Psygnosis expanded, opening a few more satellite offices, also attracting some unhappy Microprose employees. Then, 3D Lemmings and Lomax came along, besides other also interesting titles like, for instance, the amazingly funny Discworld, that also spawned a year later a well-received sequel.
Are you looking at me lustfully?
Me? Madam, after a day like this? Not a chance.
Oh.
Formula 1 from Bizarre Creations, one of my favorite racing games on the PC back in '96, that features an awesome soundtrack which includes a few songs from a couple of Sony artists by that time, Joe Satriani and Steve Vai. My copy of the game came bundled with my Diamond Monster 3DFX card, and the first time I played it, I was simply blown away. The astonishing Alundra that, as you know, made me cry, swear, and throw DualShocks against pillows. The amazing Space Blaster Colony Wars that included, besides the awesome soundtrack by Tim Wright, 5 different endings. The mind-blowing and Blade Runner-inspired G-Police that was done whilst the same team was developing Overboard, with its Caribbean vibe and relaxed tunes. And inevitable sequels to Destruction Derby and Wipeout. Between all that good stuff, there were other horrible games just like this one that I have here. ODT, Escape or Die Trying, a really weird 3D adventure thing that recently saw its Nintendo 64 unreleased version being leaked online. Despite all the commercial success that Psygnosis games demonstrated, internally things weren't so bright. Sony was constantly changing directors, and competition between studios was highly incentivized, rather than helping each others out. One of Psygnosis' founder, Ian Hetherington, was consequently left off the company founded back in 1984. But he wouldn't rest, so after Imagine Software and Psygnosis, Ian and Martin Kenwright founded in '99 Evolution Studios, a studio that curiously made exclusive video games for Sony's still to come PlayStation consoles 2, 3 and 4, the WRC and MotorStorm franchises, and as well and more recently Drive Club. Back to Psygnosis, they would go on publishing many sequels for their greatest franchises, and as well brand new IPs, until Sony decided to shut down all satellite offices by 2001, turning Psygnosis into SCE Studio Liverpool. They would go on for 11 more years, centering its development into the F1 license, releasing each year a new updated and improved game, now for the PlayStation 2 and for the 2006 edition, also available on Sony's PSP. 2007 was the year for their first venture into the brand new PlayStation 3, releasing the realistic and beautiful F1 Championship Edition with 6-axis compatibility, being this one the last F1 game from Studio Liverpool. Also, and along with the F1 games, the other franchise that was still going was Wipeout, that saw a huge commercial acclaim with both PS2 and PSP releases: Wipeout Fusion, Wipeout Pure, Wipeout Pulse, Wipeout HD and Wipeout HD Fury, and lastly Wipeout 2048 for the PS Vita in 2012, the last game from Psygnosis / Studio Liverpool. So on the 22nd of August of that year, Sony closed the doors of SCE Studio Liverpool, formerly known as Psygnosis. Sony stated that they were focusing their investment plans on other studios that were working on new and more exciting projects. Psygnosis left us a legacy of awesome titles and franchises, giving at the same time the opportunity to small companies to prosper and emerge in this industry, being renowned today as the most successful in the business. With that said, every gamer bows to Psygnosis. Thank you so much. Hope you've enjoyed my look back at one of the most important names in the video gaming industry. Please take a look at my other videos related to Psygnosis and like, share and subscribe to the Pixel Thing. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you all next week.